Welcome to the Dating Debrief podcast. My name is Jessica, and today we are talking about selfishness. And here on the couch, we have...
My name is Joel. I'm the young adults pastor at Cornerstone and married to an incredible woman named Emily.
My name's Bri. I work on the students team, and I'm single.
Let's get started. Okay guys, so here we are again, debriefing a dating sermon series. What did you guys think? What stuck out to you?
I think the Ephesians 5 verse, Lynn did such a good job articulating what submit to one another actually looks like. That it's not just obedience, it's not just authority, it's taking my hopes and dreams and laying it at the foot of the person that I'm trying to serve and love well. And one of the most beautiful parts in that is that it's out of reverence for Christ. It's not because they're deserving of it. It's not because they're always going to do the right thing or meet my expectations, but because Jesus always does. So. Yeah,
that's so good. Mm-hmm. There's just such rich wisdom there of like following Jesus's lead on that and how we treat others. That's awesome. Yeah. What about you, Bri? What stuck out to you from the message?
I think the one thing when he was talking about how the world really wants us to focus on selfishness. Yeah. And then I didn't even think about it until he started saying certain words of just like, well, you're single, then you should just like date around. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, I didn't even realize that until like it's actually like said to me. So I think that was one that was kind of just like, I didn't realize how much we really do focus on it. Yeah. So.
And that's so crazy because I think if we're not constantly on guard, like in the church, like those things from the world seep in, you know, and it can just even be in our casual conversations where all of a sudden, like, you can be in a Christian context, but like, oh, that is some worldly wisdom that we are tying with a cute little Hobby Lobby kind of Christian little coffee mug bow. Yeah. And it's like, you do you, girl. And it's like, no, like, you do God, like in God's way.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's so, like we've accepted it without questioning it almost. Like we've said, this is just what you're supposed to do when you're a young adult or when you're trying to figure out what it looks like to move towards marriage. You're just supposed to just breathe this air of selfishness and experimentation and doing what I want in this time of life, and then somehow know how to flip the switch when you get married and now be a person who serves. Like that's just, it's wild. Yeah. That's what we're expecting.
When Lynn was talking about even bringing that metaphor home of like on your wedding day, like your groom is gonna wear a tux and then that night he's gonna take it off and return it the next day. Like it really is who you are and who you bring into marriage really is like who you are in a lot of ways. Yeah. So let's get practical then. Like how do we prepare ourselves in singleness for those marriages that we're seeking after? And I think a good place to start is we talked a lot about selfishness this weekend. So how would you guys define selfishness?
I define selfishness as the lens that I make decisions through is trying to find an advantage for myself. So if I'm thinking every decision I make is through the lens of how does this benefit me, what do I get out of this, or how does this harm me, I think that's a selfish worldview. And so then as we bring that into dating relationships or eventually marriage, that's not going to be helpful towards what we talked about in Ephesians 5 or Philippians 2, do nothing out of selfish ambition. Like we are learning and practicing something that we don't want to be part of our marriage someday.
Yeah, that's so good. Super good. Totally track with that. That verse in Philippians 2, what is it again? Do nothing
out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. And then it says, but in everything consider others better than yourselves. Yeah. It's like, how do we expect to arrive there if we're not practicing that? Like that's hard enough even if we were wired that way to actually execute, but we're wired to think of ourselves and be selfish, but then we expect to just bippity boppity boo, I put that wedding tux on and all of a sudden I'm a selfless person, and it's not going to work that way.
It's not. So that kind of leads to a question though of how do we practice selflessness if we find ourselves not in a relationship? What do you guys think about that?
I think just the way to practice would just be serving others. I think you can start little just by, serving at a church.
Yeah.
I think you don't realize until you're in it. I mean, other ways too is just seeing your friends and everything when they're wanting something, when you kind of think back and you're like, okay, this is not something I would truly ever do, but because I love this person so much, I will do this for them. And just having someone's back.
That's good.
I think that will kind of help set towards being in a relationship.
Yeah. I think it's the best time to practice is when you're not, there's no target of your affection. Like there's not someone that you're trying to impress or have see you being selfless, because working with young people, you see all the time, like all of a sudden this guy's starting to show up at church and serve a lot more, but it's because he's trying to show her that he's a servant. And it's like, I don't even think that's the selflessness that God desires for us. I think he wants us to be people who are selfless, because the implication in selflessness is that I get nothing out of this. It's for other people's benefit. So if you can do what Bri said and like think about other people's needs, find places to serve where you get nothing out of it and there's no target of your affection in a person you're trying to date, I think that's a fantastic place to start. And what a metric for evaluation too. Like if we think about who should I be interested in dating, it's like if I'm looking for the people that are serving and being selfless before they get anything out of it from me as a potential partner, that's a beautiful place to start for evaluation.
Yeah. And that's interesting what you're talking about too, because when you think of scripture that says like man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Like even in this kind of like wooing stage of dating, it's like you can do these different behaviors, like as Lynn would say, maybe you're a backyard dog, you know, but like where's your heart in that, you know? And like you know, from our heart, like our mouth speaks, but I think we also like show our real like just selves, you know, in what we do. Like people show themselves, they don't just tell us who they are, so we have to be watching a bit more and stuff.
I've heard a pastor, David Marvin, use this phrase that I just think is so powerful. He says, everyone you meet is a candidate for God's grace.
Ooh, that's good.
And I just think that reframes our minds when we look at people, regardless of dating, relationship, or marriage context, and we look at people across from us, not as someone who needs to earn being served or being cared for from us, but as someone who God has declared so valuable that he died for them. You know, like if we view them through that lens, it's a lot easier to move towards them and be selfless. And again, that's in light of Jesus being deserving of our selflessness and our submission, not that person. So it's just a helpful reframing in our mind.
I think something else too, though, of like this principle of like, how do I practice being selfless when I'm not in a relationship? I think a lot of it too is like, are you living a life that even pleases God? Like Lynn was talking about, like living in marriage, like living a life where you're pleasing your spouse. Like your role is to thrill their heart with like your behavior. And it's like, are we thrilling God's heart? You know, is that something like in your morning, like when you're waking up and greeting the day, like are you pondering those things? I'm not in that sense, like that. So that was like a conviction point even to me, just pondering that of like, whoa, like how do we like just really take that principle of like making God happy, you know, and really live it out more and more. Totally.
Psalm says, I think it's thoughts of my mind and meditations of my heart be pleasing to you. Oh God. So like you're saying, like how are we viewing our world and our lives through, am I living a life that's pleasing to the Lord? That's really good.
I think that works in like marriage too, because I mean if you don't have that and then your spouse doesn't have that in your singleness, and when you're coming together, how do you create it to where like God is in your relationship?
That's
if
good.
You're not pleasing him already on your own.
That's so good. Okay, so thinking of that though, I would love for us to spend a minute and talk about like what are some common ways we see selfishness in dating? Like what are some red flags? Like what are some things to be looking out for? Maybe it's just a yellow flag, you know?
Beige flag.
Beige flag. But what are some things in dating that might show someone, oh, this person is selfish?
I think about like, say if they're not setting up time. Kind of just like, hey, like, I'm doing this, you can join if you want, or I want to hang out with you. Ooh, I just don't want to today. Like, little things like that. Not creating that time to even create a connection with this person.
Yeah. Being wishy-washy, like their feelings are kind of like ebb and flow, guiding, you know. And that's really good too, because then that shows like there's a commitment level that's not really there. Like they're higher than the commitment they made with you. That's good.
I would say practically, I think part of the air we breathe today is that you can be dating a ton of different people at one time.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think about like right up front, I'm just going to red flag that's selfish, you know? Because I think that removes clarity from any of the one people that you should be pursuing towards marriage. So if you see someone who is doing that, or you're suspecting of doing that, they're being selfish in trying to find someone that meets their needs, not trying to get someone else or get to know someone else during the dating process. So probably a pretty big red flag.
Yeah. I think also too, like maybe yellow flags, just if they're not taking your preferences into account, if they're not even trying to learn like your preferences too, that can be a bit of a yellow flag, depending on where you're at in your, you know, like dating commitment and stuff like that. But
and we talked about boundaries before too, and if they're pushing back on your boundaries,
ooh, that's good.
They're probably thinking through a selfish lens.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really good.
I think you can also tell a lot from a person when they're in a group of people. Yeah. If he's just gonna, or she is like pushing you to the side and not necessarily allowing you to be a part of this group, I think that also just shows too.
That was really good. Okay, so we have a question from Instagram that's a little tricky, so I'd love your guys' thoughts on this. If you're selfish and your significant other is selfish, how do you handle it?
I think it's different if you're in dating. If you're in a dating relationship and you're realizing the person you are is selfish and the person you're dating is selfish, maybe don't date. You know, like I think that might be harsh for the people listening, but I think that's a selfish thing to continue to date if you're not ready to actually love the person and submit to the person like Scripture calls us to. In marriage, you've now made a covenant under God to love this person even if they're selfish. And so it's a really cool opportunity for you to go first, for you to say, I'm not loving you and only if you do your part. Like I'm not waiting for you to hold up your end of the bargain to love you. I'm loving you regardless. And again, this points back to Jesus. It says, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And it's out of his willingness to go 100% when we could bring nothing to the table. That's where we take our cues from, is that example. So my spouse is not holding up their end of the deal. I'm going to love them regardless. I'm going to fight to not be selfish. I'm going to keep my eyes on Jesus and learn from that, even if they don't come around for a while.
That's so good, and especially when you think of that passage too of like Jesus came to serve, not be served. And why do you want to get married? You know, why do you want to date? Like, why do you want to have a significant relationship? Like, there is some elements of that of like, it is loving someone. Yes, there is a transaction in some ways of being loved at the same time, but when we have the biblical worldview, like, we are to care and love and support and sharpen that person, that significant other, like 365 days a year, 24 hours, like that's what marriage is. And so if we don't know what the goal of marriage, it's like, why are we dating? You know,
it's so dangerous because I think we are like, Jesus, help me find a person, and like he finally brings a person into our life, and then we're like, okay, thank you, you know, and we like push them to the side. It's like, no, we take our cues to learn. Marriage is a sanctification process of looking more like God, looking more like Jesus. And like you said, Jess, like being a servant is not our natural posture. So we got to learn and ask Jesus to sharpen us through this marriage that he's given us. Yeah.
Joel, you've been married how many years?
Going on 4.
Would you say marriage is hard?
Absolutely. Marriage is hard. Marriage is hard, everybody.
And then Bri, you were single and wonderful. Do you think, like, looking at the marriages in your life, would you say that they look hard or do they look easy? Like, what would you say?
I think a mixture.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it looks pretty easy, but I think it's because of the marriages that I've seen and the marriages that pour into me have that very selflessness in their relationships and all. So it looks easy, but of course I know deep down marriage is hard.
Yeah.
I mean, a relationship's hard. Friendships are hard, so.
Yeah. I think we got to talk about, what do you do if you're seeing that you are too selfish to date?
Well, if you're seeing it, that's already a good first step. Being self-aware of the selfish needs that you have is, that's good. You're good. Already.
Yeah. Yay, you're seeing that you're selfish.
Yeah. And sometimes, going off that, I don't know that we will see that we're selfish. Like, it's a great thing, like Bri said, if you do. But sometimes I think we need other people who will tell us the areas where we're being selfish. And I think we can invite that. Like, if I'm a single person who is having a hard time having successful relationships that move towards marriage, I'm going to invite people into my life who will tell me why. This is going down a rabbit trail in real time, but my two best friends in the world, there was this day where we went out to dinner and we sat at the table for 3 hours. We were a bunch of 20-somethings trying to figure out how to get married, essentially. And we just gave each other permission to, like, call out the thing that we all saw, but we didn't have the courage to address.
Oh, wow.
And it was amazing. Just like, hey, like, this is gonna sting.
Yeah.
Pastor Chris Hilkin talked about wounds from a friend last week in Proverbs. And I just think that's so helpful to, like, call out the blind spots that people have in their selfishness. Yeah. Because they aren't gonna see them. They're blind spots for a reason. So then if we want them to be people who become selfless, who move towards selflessness in dating and eventually marriage, let's tell each other that. So biblical Christian community is so helpful towards getting that awareness, I think, in some cases.
My friends back in Southern California, we called them our edges.
Okay.
I'm pointing out an edge. I need Jesus to smooth it out.
This is a rough spot.
This is a rough spot. That's really good. And I think what you touched on too, giving people that permission, like, already, like, if you're recognizing that you're a selfish person and you're inviting people in to speak into that, like, what are areas where you see that I'm selfish? Like, and asking people who are wise, who go to church, who hit these benchmarks of, like, they are prioritizing Jesus is just huge. Like, you don't want people speaking into your life who don't know, like your Jesus, who don't know the Bible, like, you want wise counsel, but having those friends, to speak in is huge. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any questions of some topics that maybe we're not touching that are prevalent to your life and your conversations of dating, please comment them below. Otherwise, thank you so much, and we'll see you next week for the Dating Debrief.